The following is a conversation with Thorin Klosowski, security and privacy activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a member-supported nonprofit that spent over 3 decades defending civil liberties online, privacy, free speech, and freedom of expression. In this episode, we get into some of the small, easy-to-miss ways your privacy gets chipped away, like how deleted messages on your phone might not actually be gone, or how AI tools that watch your screen can accidentally scoop up conversations you thought were private. We also talk about what rights you actually have depending on which state you live in, what a real federal privacy law would need to include to be worth passing, and where Thorin thinks this is all headed as AI becomes part of daily life. My hope for this episode is the same as Thorin's, that someday using the internet feels as easy and unguarded as talking to a friend in person. Here's my conversation with Thorin Klosowski. For those who don't know, what exactly is the Electronic Frontier Foundation and why is it important to, like the average person?
Yeah, so the EFF is a member-supported nonprofit that has been fighting for digital rights online for over 35 years at this point. The kind of basic idea is we fight for a lot of the civil rights that we all have out in the real world, in the internet. So whether that's privacy, free speech, kind of freedom of expression, like all of those sorts of things that we have when we just walk around, we want to have those online too.
That's interesting. I actually did not know it was around for that long. That's honestly insane. So, for our first segment, I guess we'll discuss, the invisible side of things like privacy and stuff like that. Like, I know in a lot of your work you mentioned push notifications or AI in messaging apps. Like, there are a lot of features out there that seem benign but are actually pretty dangerous for our privacy. So, the first thing I was wondering is, what exactly is the problem with push notifications? Why are they dangerous?
Yeah, that's an interesting one that has gotten a lot of attention recently because of a court case that revealed that Apple collects and stores push notifications in a database on your phone for longer than you might expect. So this became an issue with Signal disappearing messages specifically, since those are set up to disappear after a set number of time, or in this case, when the app was deleted from the phone completely. And it turned out that they were stored in the phone for longer. So law enforcement was able to access those with different forensic technologies whenever they had gone through someone's phone that they had arrested. So there's a lot of these sorts of things like these little kind of tiny things that we do all day or that we don't really think about very often that kind of can have lasting big impactful moments, whether if our phones are seized by law enforcement or if someone installs spyware on our phone to look, to spy on us, or just if, companies are trying to build an ad profile off of us. It's a lot of this tiny little things that we just don't think about very often, turn out to be pretty important in different ways.
Yeah. So just kind of following up with that, I know there's been a lot of like AI introduced to messaging apps. Like I think you talked about WhatsApp and then also like Instagram, stuff like that. What are, the problems with this for people like us, just users of the app?
Yeah, there shouldn't be a problem, I guess. There should be kind of a barrier between the two things. And for now, there is for the most part, but we're worried that there might not be in the future. So, with something like Signal or WhatsApp or iMessages, an end-to-end encrypted communication tool that makes it so the company who runs that communication tool can't see what you're saying. It makes it so just you and the person you're talking to know what you're talking about. They might get other types of data, but they can't see the actual content of the messages. AI tools can kind of break into that in kind of curious ways if we're not careful. So a lot of like agentic AI or AI tools that kind of like look at your screen and capture information while you're using it might grab those messages. What happens then is kind of out of your control. So this was kind of a problem in recent history with Microsoft's Recall tool, which was something built into Windows that basically took a screenshot every, I don't remember what the rate was. It took screenshots of your screen all of the
Oh,
time.
wow.
So you could go back, so you could go back and search through and like look through stuff. But that included during its original launch, that included Signal, which meant that it was capturing all of your Signal messages and storing it in a database that Microsoft said was encrypted, but it's still it's not in your control, which is kind of what you want with these secure chat apps. That did end up getting fixed in a couple different ways. Signal did something on their end, and Microsoft kind of improved it. But it just shows how easily this sort of stuff can accidentally like fall into an AI database, and what happens after that is like really hard to figure out, especially just from like a user point of view.
Yeah. I mean, when was the recall incident? Was that recently? Or
It was in the last couple of years. My memory is
oh
not
wow.
great with time on that stuff, but like it was one of those things that like Microsoft had launched it in maybe beta or maybe they just announced it and then it was just pretty it needed a lot of work and then they kind of worked on it over the course of like a year or two-ish and then it finally I think it's out now, but it's only kind of on like newer PCs that support their whole AI Copilot thing.
Oh, wow. Okay, interesting. So, in our next sort of section, I'd like to talk about how, like people like us, just normal users of the apps, can like protect our privacy and like our data and explore what exactly our rights are because I know a lot of people like myself, like we just skip through like the privacy policy or like we don't really know like what we have control over. So could you define for us, like what rights do we exactly have and should we like be aware of?
Yeah, so your rights depend on what state you live in, unfortunately. There is no federal privacy law right now. So what we have instead are a bunch of state laws. And we have, I don't know what the running count is right now. It's 15, 16 maybe states, maybe more, that have different privacy laws. The core of those laws is different depending on the state, but the kind of like essentials that are in most of them are the right to access information, the right to delete information, and usually the right to opt out of tracking or third-party sales. You can kind of how you can exercise those rights depending on it depends on which state you're in. In California, for example, we have a new tool called Drop that you can request data brokers delete all the information you have that they have on you in one tool. You'll also have the right to say request information that any website you have an account in basically has ever collected about you. I tend to do these just kind of like out of curiosity and fun. This is my idea of fun. But it's like anywhere you shop that maybe like, I mean, you go to Home Depot, you go to Best Buy, like whatever, you can request your information from there. And sometimes what you'll get back is maybe just a list of things you've bought over the years, but you also might get an entire advertising profile that they have built about you and sold or purchased from somebody else that has like a whole ad profile of every single interest you might have. You might have their concepts of what your political affiliations might be, just a whole breadth of information. So that's kind of one thing. And then you can also, in that same tool, you can usually request that those companies delete that information. It's cumbersome, time consuming. It takes a lot of work. It's very difficult to kind of do for everything, but it can be useful in some cases. So that's the kind of like law protections. And then there's, of course, like different features that every website and app and tool offers on their own, not because any government pushed them to do it, but just because they do. So that's like Facebook's, 8 million different privacy settings
Mm-hmm.
and kind of everything that you find like in the settings and different parts of apps.
Yeah. I mean, are there any apps or features right now that you could call out for lack of privacy or that just people are just not aware of right now?
I think it's easier to do the reverse, honestly.
Oh.
I would argue that most, especially social media sites and most apps default to a less private state, and it usually requires you to kind of go in and do something about that, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be sharing information. Um, there hasn't been, we're just inundated with these sorts of things over and over again all of the time that like there's nothing that really has like bubbled up recently that is super interesting, at least that isn't like a data breach of some kind. There was like like someone actually gaining access to a system that they weren't supposed to. Um, but yeah, it's less common to see a good privacy setting than it is to come across a bad one.
Yeah. I mean, are there any specific settings that you'd recommend people to turn on like the popular apps?
Yeah, I think the core thing to start with at the very, very beginning is to turn on or to disable allow apps to ask to track on iPhone and delete your advertising ID on Android. That kind of at least like stops a lot of the tracking that happens on your phone or tablet. From there, you can also, like for web browsing, we make a tool called Privacy Badger, which you can install that opts you out of like tracking and kind of stops a lot of the different kinds of tracking tools that follow you around when you browse the web. So those are two things that can like really like boost your privacy without you really having to do anything at all after that. It's kind of like a set it and forget it sort of thing. Beyond that, I generally just recommend opening up any app that you use regularly and kind of poking around in there and seeing what settings there are. There might be tools that fix your privacy. There might also be tools that just make the app work better, like in how
Yeah.
you want it to work. I think people are kind of like scared of diving into the settings when they shouldn't be. And you'll find stuff like you'll often find like just like don't sell my information or don't share my information with anybody. That's a pretty common one that you'll find either in the app's settings or sometimes like in the privacy policy page. Um, Other things to look for, maybe like if it's any sort of social network, to make sure that you're only visible in ways that you want to be visible. So if you want your account to be private or you don't want it to be, some tools like Blue Sky allow you to like not show up in web results. So there's different kinds of like little settings you can do that way where like you're still public on Blue Sky, but someone just Googles your name and Blue Sky won't show up. So there's like little things like that that you'll find. Those are just some couple examples.
Yeah, cool. So, lastly, I'd like to go into, like what's you kind of like hinted at this, but like what's going on in the future, like what's the future of like digital privacy and stuff like that. I know you've done a lot of work in the past and the EFF has been along for like a long time. So like what are some trends that you've been noticing recently and like what do you think is going to happen in the future, especially with the rise and popularity of AI?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to predict.
Yeah.
There are a few things that I can say here. I think there is an increasing push for a good federal privacy bill that we can actually get passed and have a real law in this country. I think that, it feels a little impossible right now, but it also is something that more and more people are realizing how important it is. And especially as more states pass these laws, I think it's showing that the federal government could step in here and do something useful and kind of give everyone a good baseline instead of like where we're at, which is like a lot of people in a lot of states are just kind of out to sea and have no idea what's going on. And a lot of the other states are not as strong as, say, California's. So I think that there's like a lot of work to be done there that could be good and beneficial. Um, as you allude to, AI is going to have some impact on how like we think about this stuff moving forward, how it is impacting privacy and how it kind of the thing that I'm concerned about is that it makes it a lot easier to connect different strands of information about us into one central place. I think that's the kind of main concern, and whether that's a federal government kind of building bigger, deeper profiles about us, or just yet another advertising company doing the same. I think those are the kind of implications that we are thinking through and trying to figure out how to, put some sort of barrier around it. On top of just like the general usage of different AI tools being more prevalent and the way people communicate with them may or may not kind of lead to them revealing a little bit more information about themselves than they intend, or not realizing how many places that information is going. I think with a lot of the tools we have now, most people are generally familiar with like, I'm using this app, is collecting my information, maybe it's sharing it with a third party. But I've noticed that a lot of people don't have quite the same relationship with the way that they utilize chatbots, and especially as like a lot of these tools are being advertised for like mental health and healthcare and like all of these things that they're not getting the same sort of protections that you would get when talking to a doctor or a therapist. And so
Yeah.
there's like, I mean, there's a million different ways that this can go wrong. And we just need to be thinking about them and making sure that people understand what they're doing when they're communicating with these tools and the protections that they do and don't have.
I mean, yeah, that's so crazy that you mentioned that. I think a lot of people look to AI for like advice and things like that, like a lot of really personal stuff, which can get dangerous. I'm actually curious. You mentioned like the federal, like a goal of kind of having like a federal regulation. So, what exactly would that look like?
I mean, in a perfect world, that would look similar to California's, but maybe a little bit stronger. The two things that keep happening, though, is that there will be these bills that are pushed that do two things that we don't like. One is preemption, which means that it basically supersedes all state laws and like renders them null. So if the bill is strong now, or not as strong as California, either way, it kind of like takes California's law out at the knees, which makes California weaker. it often usually makes it so that they states can't build stronger laws on top of it. So if in the future, if it again takes 30 years for the federal government to pass a good privacy up like an update to a privacy law, then states wouldn't be able to improve on their own. And kind of that's it's a non-starter because the federal government moves so slow. States need to have this kind of power. The other thing that the federal bills often lack are private right of action, which is the right for all of us to sue if we are have our privacy violated. And the reason that's important is because otherwise, you need to create a some sort of institution or rely on like state attorneys general, and that requires funding. It requires like them to know what to look at and how to like bring a case. Whereas if we just all have a private right of action, it allows us or other people to bring their own case against a company. So it's usually faster moving. It empowers us to like push companies to protect our privacy better when we notice violations instead of having to like go to a government entity and ask them to do it for us. But yeah, so I mean, like in a perfect world, it would look something similar to California's, but still allow for states to make strong bills and allow people to sue them, sue companies.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I actually did not know any that stuff about like how the state laws have to like be able to build on top of the federal stuff. That's pretty interesting. My last question is just kind of, you know, why do you think this is important for the average person to understand, and what do you hope people take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to forget how important privacy is. I think it's easy to kind of just assume that everything that we have is out there, everything we do is out there, there's nothing we can do about it. And I just feel like it's what all of these big tech companies want us to believe because they want us to think we aren't empowered to have our own, take control of our own privacy and to make our own choices here. And we see this what happens with this data over and over again, whether it's you know, identity theft or whether it's the government buying data and using it for like maybe reasons that you object to, depending on who is in office at any given point. Like as we've seen in the last 20 years, it's just going back and forth between different, Democrats, Republicans, and like the chances are you're not going to like the party who's in power at one point in the next 8 to 12 years. Like it's just how it goes. So whatever the government is doing at some point is going to bother you.
Yeah.
And them buying and using data to track people, to find people, to do whatever is a huge problem. And it's easy for companies to tell us that it doesn't matter, but it truly, absolutely does. And we should all be able to just browse and use the internet freely without having to think about any of this. Like, my goal is to have everyone, all of your listeners, everyone that you know, just log in online and use the internet without having to
Yeah.
think about it or without having to
Yeah.
worry about like, is my phone listening to me? Or why is this ad following me everywhere? I bought these shoes 2 weeks ago and I've seen this ad. Like it's just like none of that should be part of our lives. And we should all just have the comfort to use the internet freely, just like we, go outside and talk to our friends in real life.
Yeah, honestly, I really hope that happens, and I hope that happens in the near future. That would be awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was really fun. Yeah, thank you for the work you do as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.